with Joe Asher, who's the CEO of William Hill US, the American subsidiary of the London-listed William Hill. And Joe, 17 months ago, your life and the lives of a lot of other people changed when the United States Supreme Court allowed sports betting to be legal in this country. And we've just had a tremendous amount of excitement. We've had a tremendous amount of activity, a lot of which has occurred by you on behalf of William Hill. Can you just give us a little bit of an update as to what's been accomplished in that time and what you see in the near future?
Sure. So after the Supreme Court basically turned the issue back to the states, a number of states were pretty quick to legalize sports betting. Started in Delaware and then in New Jersey, and now I think there's 10 or 11 states where we're operating, including an Indian tribe in New Mexico. So a lot's happened in a pretty short period of time, and there's quite a bit of legislative action still to come over the next year. So it's pretty clear that the momentum around the legalization of sports betting is growing, and I think you're going to see a number of additional states legalize sports betting in the not too distant future.
And what has William Hill specifically accomplished during this time? I know you've got a tremendous number of deals that you've signed.
Yeah, we've signed a lot of deals with various partners. The most significant one being with Eldorado Resorts, which now owns 20% of the William Hill US business, and in exchange for that, we got the right to operate their sports books in the properties they had and any that they would subsequently acquire. So, we're big fans of the Caesars merger and hope they get to the finish line with that in the not too distant future. It's going to create a whole bunch of additional work for us and our team, and our team has grown pretty significantly over the last year and a half, and we're very much in a hiring mode today. And we've done deals with now it's two professional sports leagues, the NHL and the NBA. As well as with the Golden Knights here in Las Vegas and the Devils in New Jersey, and now the Capitals and the Wizards. We announced the deal last week with Ted Leonsis and Monumental Sports to build a sports book inside the Capital One Arena in the heart of Washington, D.C. And I think it's a great indicator of how quickly things have changed. It wasn't that long ago when the professional sports leagues were fighting to uphold PASPA in the courts and in the Supreme Court, and now that the court ruled, they've clearly adapted, and now we're going to go from no sports betting should be allowed to we're going to have an arena, or we're going to have a sports book inside the arena at a very high-profile arena at that, sort of located, in between the White House and the Capitol, on top of one of the busiest metro stations in the country. So it's a pretty seismic shift in perspectives. And really wasn't that long ago when the NFL did not permit advertising from the Las Vegas Convention and Visitors Bureau during the Super Bowl. Right, I think it was about 15 years ago. Las Vegas wanted to advertise during the Super Bowl, and it wasn't specific to gambling, right? It was, you remember the old ad campaign, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. And that was not permitted to be aired. And so we've gone from that to, there's an arena being built right behind Mandalay Bay, and the Raiders are moving to town next year. So it's pretty amazing when you think about the shift around these things.
One of the things that someone mentioned earlier today in one of our discussions, which I thought was interesting, I had not thought about it, but the actual physical shape of the sports books themselves are changing. There was almost a cookie cutter approach to sportsbook design a few years ago, and now you've got more of a lounge effect, and we've seen in Golden, in the Strat, where you have a sports book, a new sports book, they extend a lot of their seating area from their central bar to overlook the sports book. Could you tell us, and now you're talking about the arena, which I'm sure will be different from a historical casino-based sports book. Can you talk a little bit about the sports books themselves becoming part of the experience?
Sure, and I think to some extent the advent of mobile betting has had a role in this. So if you just want to bet, right, you can bet on your phone in a number of places, including here in Nevada as well as New Jersey, and so it's just transactional in nature. But the retail experience is just so different, right? Because it's about the big screens and having a few drinks and having something to eat and congregating with your friends. And so, and you can spend hours and hours sitting there and watching all the games on a Saturday or a Sunday. And so it's about that communal experience and the place where you want to hang out and spend a few hours with your friends. And so if you just want to make a bet, go in, make your bet. There's a lot of ways to do that. So now the really important thing is to build these first-class experiences where people want to congregate and spend a few hours.
Not long ago, 17 months ago, there were these debates about how big could the sports betting market be, and some people would throw out a figure of 50 billion, some people would say 150 billion, and they're all based on guesstimates. Now we're starting to get some evidence, and we're getting to see some ramp up from operations that are a year old and older. We're getting some idea of who will legalize and what form a lot of that legalization will take. For example, will allow mobile and so on, and online gaming. Now that we're starting to get some of that evidence, how would you quantify the potential, say in dollar terms, for the sports betting market in the U.S.?
Well, there's been a number of third-party studies that have put the revenue, they use different years around this, but call it 2025. And these estimates are all over the place, but I think the average is somewhere around $10 billion in revenue, and that's just the direct, sports betting win. The amount of money that gets wagered, there's been all these estimates over the years about how much money is bet in the U.S., and they went as high as, I think, $380 billion was one number that was sort of out there in the public domain and bandied about. And it was actually kind of funny. A few years ago, we actually were kind of curious about that number, so we went back and tried to figure out where the number came from. And if you traced it all the way back, it was basically made up, right? But it became sort of this number that was frequently quoted in the press, even though it didn't have a whole lot of substance behind it originally. Because the black market is so vast and so big, and it's not transparent. The illegal bookies typically are not filing their tax returns and reporting the amount of handle that they do, so you don't really know. But it's big, right? You look at the size of the market already in New Jersey, and that's just going to grow just based on population. And you look at the early adoption in places like Iowa, for instance, which has proven to be a pretty big market. So there's a big appetite. People like to bet on sports, and now they have the ability in a number of states to do it legally.
And along with sports betting, which historically has been sort of a niche, almost an amenity for casinos, you now have in-game, you have mobile. In some states you have the legalization of sports betting accompanied by legalization of online gaming. How big do you see, or important do you see sports betting to people like casino companies and so on, now that we have this bigger sports betting industry?
Well, look, clearly it's an added benefit, right? It's gotten a lot of attention within our industry, and there are a number of anecdotal reports of new people who previously had not been going into a casino going in. You've seen the overall gaming revenue tick up in some jurisdictions. I read an article that in Atlantic City, I think Steve Callender from now working for Eldorado, but at Tropicana was talking about the increase in unrated table play at the property on a weekend that was being attributed to new folks coming into the building because they could bet on sports. And so clearly there's been quite a bit of ancillary revenue generated, but it's always difficult to be precise.
One of the things that you have discussed and others have discussed as they meet with legislators and other policymakers is to have a regulatory environment and a tax regime that could allow people to be profitable. And we've had some states where I think you probably believe they've not had the most productive environment. But by and large, is the rollout in these different states, is it in such a manner that it can be a profitable, sustaining industry?
You know, yes is the general answer to that. Obviously, the outlier from a taxation perspective has been Pennsylvania. The upfront license fees in Illinois are also very, very high, which will impact the size of the investments that people make, for sure. But in most of the states, the tax rate's sort of settling in at right around 10%, which at least gives, a fighting chance to the legal industry to compete with the black market, because, the black market is not like all these illegal bookies, just kind of threw up their hands and decided to go back to school and become accountants, right? They're still out there, with their customers, and the higher you make the tax rate, the more difficult it is for the legal market to compete. The better it is for the black market, and it's sort of not all that helpful in the overall sports betting ecosystem.
As a final question, if you were to take out your crystal ball, and we've seen so much change in the last 17 months, that if you were looking at that crystal ball and say, here's what the industry is going to look like in 3 to 5 years, what would you say?
Yeah, it's just so hard to tell, because we've talked about just the shift from sports betting's really bad to there's going to be a sports book in the Capital One Arena, and there's going to be a sports book at Wrigley Field, and there's going to be a sports book at Comiskey Park in the United Center in Illinois. And, I think that was pretty hard to see a number of years ago. I think there's going to continue to be, quite a bit of investment in the space. I think you're going to see, the media companies and the sports teams and the sports leagues continue to embrace the opportunities. There's some folks who are probably sitting in a garage somewhere or have their startup idea that they're going to fund to try to figure out how to make the business more exciting, more interesting, and create additional revenue, which ultimately what it's about. So I think you're going to continue to see quite a bit of innovation around this.
Okay, Joe, very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Frank.